Hello and welcome, I'm your Code Monkey. Do you know what are the minimum requirements to define a mesh in code? Or do you know if this static variable, if this one gets reset on loading a different scene? Or can you answer the question, how many classes should your game have? So can you answer these questions? Either way, whether you answer yes or no, hopefully you can learn something. A while ago I built this system on my website that is something that I've wanted to do for ages. Basically I wrote a ton of really interesting questions and wrote some super detailed answers. Then I made a system which automatically every 3 days picks a brand new question to ask. You can always go onto the website and see the latest question, or you can log in and go to your user page, and over here you can enable the question of the day, and this way you'll get an email every time a new question is generated. I think this is a pretty fun way to learn. I've already enjoyed getting some of these emails myself. Since I wrote so many questions, there's still a bunch of them that I don't remember doing, so every time it's great for me to answer. Here, let's go through the last 10 questions and see if we can learn something new. By the way, if you're wondering why there have been fewer videos lately, that's because I'm hard at work on my C# course. I'm planning something similar to my Kitchen Chaos course, meaning a free version, then an optional paid version with some nice bonuses. I still have a lot of work to do, but hopefully next week I'll be able to have a video talking about my plan. You can go to the link in the description and sign up if you're interested in that course. And let me also mention that right now the Unity Asset Store is having the Unity Award sale. This month I didn't make my usual asset list videos because once again I'm busy working on the course. But if you need anything, definitely check it out to the link in the description. Starting off with question number 10, what does normalizing a vector do? So does it modify the xyz to get a magnitude of 1? Or does it invert the xyz? Or does it flatten the z? If you want, pause the video and try to answer yourself. Normalizing is something that I do a lot, so I do know that it modifies the xyz to get a magnitude of 1. And yep, that is indeed correct. And apparently 100% of the people got it right, so that's awesome. Basically, when using movement vectors, you should always normalize them before moving any object in order to make sure you get consistent movement. If you don't, then basically the vector will have a larger magnitude if the target is farther away, and then have a smaller magnitude, so basically it would move faster and then slower. Whereas if you normalize it, then basically that sets the magnitude to 1, regardless of the size of the original vector, and that way the movement will always be consistent. Another problem with not normalizing is simply using the input vector directly. This is something that actually quite a lot of beginners make this mistake. If you just compose the input vector and the player is moving diagonally, so they're pressing W and D at the same time, then the input vector is going to be 1, 1, and that it actually means that the character will move faster on the diagonals. So for example, when working on some simple character movement, always make sure you normalize your movement speed so the movement is consistent. This is something that I covered in detail in my character controller video or within my entire complete course. And this applies not just to movement but to anything. So for example, even when shooting bullets, make sure you normalize the bullet vector so that the bullet actually moves at a consistent speed. Next question, what are the minimum requirements, the array size, in order to draw a mesh quad? So you do mesh equals a new mesh, then you set the vertices to something, UV to something, and triangles to something. So what does a mesh actually contain? Does it have 4 vertices, 4 UVs, and 2 triangles? Or is it 4 vertices, 4 UVs, and 6 triangles? Or is it 6 vertices, 3 UVs, and 4 triangles? Here again, drawing dynamic meshes is something that I've done many times, so I know this one pretty much by heart. The one tricky thing is some people might answer over here this one, 4 vertices, 4 UVs, and 2 triangles, because that is technically true. The mesh does have 2 triangles, so you pretty much got a quad, and there is one triangle and then another triangle. However, over here the triangles array, in order to make a triangle, this actually requires 3 points for 3 vertices, so the correct answer is over here, 4 vertices, 4 UVs, and 6 triangles. And yep, there it is correct. And it looks like quite a lot of people actually got tripped up on that one, because again, logically speaking, it is just 2 triangles, but over here the size of the array, the triangles array, that one has 6. In general, a quad is composed of 4 points, so you need 4 vertices. And in order to place some kind of texture on those, you need the same number of vertices as you need UVs, so also 4 UVs. And again, the triangles. In order to build a triangle, you need 3 points, so that is why each logical triangle is composed of 3 points. So for 2 triangles, you need 6 values. So dynamic meshes, these are really awesome, really useful. I've used them in tons of use cases. Look at all of these. This is actually one of the first things that I learned when I first started using Unity over 10 years ago, and the reason was because this for the particle system that I wanted to last forever. For my first game, Survivor Squad, I really wanted it to have persistent particles right on the floor, and I wanted those to continue and stay there forever. And basically made me look into how to generate a mesh dynamically so that I could store that mesh and keep that consistently. Then I've also used it in conjunction with my grid system in order to build some kind of minimap. I've built a radar chart. I made how to draw with Unity. And by the way, with that one, I also combined it with the transparent Unity window in order to make the nice overlay that I use sometimes. So this is the exact same thing, the draw a mesh in Unity. So this one has tons of use cases, really awesome. Definitely make sure that you learn about dynamic meshes. And like it says down here, that is one of the first things that I started when I started learning Unity. And the reason was because my first game, Survivor Squad, it required dynamic meshes for quite a lot. It required it for the persistent particle system and also, of course, for the line of sight. Next question, what is the orthographic size in a 2D camera? So is it the units visible horizontally? Is the units visible vertically? Is it half of them horizontally or half vertically? Now honestly, this one is one that I'm always confused with. I do know that it is the vertical one, but I never know if it's the units or half the units. So I'm actually going to take a guess here. Let's say that it is the visible units. And apparently I got it wrong, so it was half the new units. Yep, this one always trips me up. It's kind of interesting how most people apparently thought that it was the visible horizontally. Basically the horizontal size that is going to depend on whatever aspect ratio you have. Like it says here, the aspect ratio is going to impact the horizontal size, and you can do some math to calculate it by simply using the camera.aspect. And the orthographic size, so if you have it of 70, you're going to see from minus 70 to plus 70 for a total of 140 units visible. The orthographic size, this is the kind of thing that you use if you have a 2D camera. So you either increase or decrease in order to zoom in or zoom out. I made a really detailed camera system video. This one is super detailed, took a lot of work to make, but I'm really happy with this one. It contains pretty much all the features you need in any kind of camera in both 2D and 3D. And then also covered 3 ways of zooming a camera. This was also a fun one. And speaking of cameras, if you're using cameras, chances are you're using Cinemachine. So one confusing thing, one thing that might be quite tricky to figure out is how do you modify anything in Cinemachine through code? That is a little bit tricky because of how Cinemachine works, but it can be done, and I covered that in this video. And Cinemachine also has a bunch of extras that make it really easy to use. One of those is the Cinemachine Confiner, which makes sure that regardless of zoom, the player does not see any more than they should. Next question, is there a problem with this code? So we've got a private void, set camera follow func, and receives a func of vector3 for the camera follow func. And then we are calling it with open parentheses, little arrow, new vector3. So is there something wrong with this? So this has to do with funcs, which are delegates. So is there no problem? Or should it be that one with return new? Or should it be that one and takes a vector3 as a parameter? Delegates are really awesome, something you definitely should learn. They're extremely powerful, like for example here, this is the kind of code that I've used many times. It's a super simple way to make the camera follow some kind of position. You pass in the delegate in order to make the camera look at any kind of position, and the position can be dynamic, since the delegate is also going to be dynamic. So in this case, I know, nope, there are no problems with this code. It is exactly like this. You just do a lambda with empty parameters and just returns a vector3. And yep, the answer is no, so that is correct. Although the 51 people that voted for this one is also technically correct. What I wanted to showcase with this option is how you don't have to include the return. You can omit the return and the compiler will implicitly include it. So if you just do it like this is perfectly valid code, you don't need the return. However, if you do add it, that is also not an issue. Like it says here, the compiler automatically adds a return when receiving a delegate into a func parameter, so it's not necessary, but it works both ways. If you've never seen this syntax before, this is called a lambda expression. This is super useful, super compact. It's a great way for quickly defining and using some functions. I use it all the time on all kinds of things, like for example on button clicks. Func and action are 2 types of delegates which can be super useful. If you don't know what they are, definitely go make sure you watch this video. They are super useful in so many use cases, so definitely make sure you learn about them. And like it says here, this particular pattern of setting a camera class to receive a func vector3 instead of a single vector3, this is a super easy way to make your camera, or really any object, follow something that moves. This is something that I use a lot in my Dinky Gardens game. I use it especially for the tutorial. On tutorial, there are a whole bunch of arrows pointing to things where the player should go, and sometimes those targets are moving, like for example, it can be a moving Dinky. So for that, I cannot give the tutorial arrow, I cannot give it a fixed point because the target can be moving. So instead, for the tutorial arrow, it receives a func of vector3, which in turn then updates based on the Dinky's position. Next question, so does this variable get reset when you load a different scene? So private, static, and score. So is it yes, no, or only when loading the main menu? This is one thing that can trip up beginners quite a bit. And the answer is no, just loading a scene, that does not impact static variables at all. So static variables is actually a good way in order to pass data between scenes. If you have some data, like for example, number of coins, amount of money, score, or so on, something like that you want to pass in between scenes, then using a static variable is a super simple way to do it. Or just pass some kind of setup data, like for example in my multiplayer kitchen chaos course. In this I use a static variable in order to define whether to enable the game in single player or multiplayer and pass in a bunch of player data. And also like it says here, related to this is you can set Unity to disable domain reloading. This actually makes compilation quite a bit faster, which is really nice, but it also comes at the cost of not automatically resetting static data even between playthroughs. So if you define some kind of static field and you set it to some kind of data, then you stop playing and you start playing again, that data will persist. So if you do play around with this option with domain reloading, definitely make sure you understand that is going to happen. Okay, next question. What is JSON and what is it useful for? So does it stand for JavaScript over Node? Is it a programming pattern? Or does it stand for JavaScript object notation and it's a data format? Or does it stand for jumping signal over nonce, and it's a crypto concept? JSON is really awesome. I'm a huge fan of it. It has been so useful in so many use cases. So I instantly know that it's a data format, it's JavaScript object notation, even though it technically doesn't have anything to do with JavaScript. And if that is indeed correct, it seems like most people got it right. So JSON is a very useful and widely used text-based data format. And despite the name, of course, it is not just used in JavaScript. So here in C# we can use it. In the end, it's really just text. It's human readable and easily editable. And pretty much any language is going to have a ton of libraries that make it super easy to work with JSON objects. One of the main ways that I use it in so many ways is for doing saving and loading. Like what I covered in this video, which I believe this video is from 2018. What I covered here is what I've been doing for saving and loading for the past 10 years. And in my latest game, Dinky Gardens, that is still exactly the same way that I handle saving and loading. I create a save object and then I convert it into JSON and simply save that into a text file. It is super simple and works perfectly. Then I also combine JSON, which is using text. I combine that with some byte saving in order to save a file with a screenshot. This was also a really fun one. Another place where JSON is used quite a lot is when dealing with web services and REST APIs. So I've also done some research on playing around with Azure in order to make an online leaderboard or a bunch of cloud-based mechanics. These were some really interesting topics to research. There's a ton of interesting stuff you can do with the cloud, and again, most of it is going to be working with JSON. And also just one quick note, which is what I mentioned here, it's human readable and easily editable. There are actually some people that think this is a problem. On my various JSON videos, there's always someone who says, okay, so if you make that for save objects, doesn't that mean players can easily cheat on their saves? And the answer is, yep, they can. This is not a bug, this is definitely a feature. JSON is intended to be easily editable. Usually my answer to that is don't worry about your player cheating on some kind of single player game. If the player wants to cheat in order to modify their save file to get a ton of money, my answer is really just let them. There's really no harm in that. On the other hand, if you're making something in multiplayer, the simple answer is don't trust the client. So if you have a multiplayer game and you have some kind of money amount, then always keep that amount in the server and never actually give that authority to the player in order to define what money they have. Next question, the profiler is useful for. Is it for balancing difficulty? Is it for level design? Or is it for identifying performance bottlenecks? I guess it would be interesting if there was a profiler for balancing difficulty, maybe something where you could see the graph when difficulty becomes really intense and then really easy. That would be fun, but nope, the profiler is used for identifying performance bottlenecks. And yep, apparently everyone got it. So basically the profiler lets you see various stats related to your game, either while running or even just in the editor. So even if you're making just editor tools, you can still use the profiler. So you can view things like how much memory you are consuming, how much garbage is being generated. You can see how many audio or physics elements are present, and importantly, how long each script is taking to execute per frame. So this is really an absolutely essential tool if you have any kind of performance issues. If you want to see how fast your game is running, this is definitely one tool you must know how to use. And then if you enable deep profile, you can see specifically how long each function is taking. This is honestly one of the best learning tools there are. If you know how to use it, that will teach you so much, especially if you try to optimize things, you do some kind of change and look in the profiler, see did that help or did it not. And same thing for garbage. Garbage is also something that becomes really important. And by using the deep profile and making all kind of changes, by doing that you can see, okay, this function is generating garbage and now it's not. But at the same time, remember the saying, premature optimization is the root of all evil. Meaning, don't just try to guess what parts of your game need to be optimized. Perhaps there is some code that might not be optimized but does not cause any issues. Like for example, you might have some code that is really insanely slow, but it only runs once on start, so it doesn't really matter. And there might be another part that you think is optimized, but in reality it isn't. So don't try to guess which parts you think are performant and which parts are not. Always use the profiler in order to identify exactly what are the performance bottlenecks. And then, of course, if you need extra performance and your game is CPU limited, then definitely check out Unity Dots, or alternatively just the burst in the job system. Remember, you don't have to use entities, you can use just these two and get massive benefits. By using Unity Dots, it is relatively complex, but can provide some massive performance improvement. And actually over here, I need to edit this question in order to add the recently updated Dots tutorial that I just made. And then some more bonus tips. For profiling the rendering, for that you can look in the frame debugger window. That will show you exactly how each frame of your game is being rendered step by step. I added a lecture on the frame debugger in the last update in my Ultimate Unity Overview course. And then for profiling memory, for that you can look into the memory profiler. I've never actually used this one just yet, but it seems really interesting how it has so much data. Next question, what is the equivalent to input.getMouseButtonDown on the input system package? So is it input system get mouse button down, or is it mouse.current.left button was pressed this frame, or is it player input.mouse.read valuable? This is definitely a bit of a tricky one, so I wonder how many people got this right. I'm pretty sure that it is mouse.current left button was pressed this frame. And if that is correct, it seems like 50% of the people didn't quite get it. The input system really is quite a bit complex, so remembering this line of code is a little bit tricky. But if you think about it, it actually makes sense. You are accessing the mouse, that is the type, the mouse type, then accessing the current mouse, so this is the one that is currently being used. Then you test out the left button and you see if that one was pressed as frame. So that is pretty much exactly the same logic as what this one does. So the input system is indeed quite a bit more complex, but it's also a lot more capable. So that complexity does have some extremely useful benefits. If you've never used the input system, I highly recommend you use it. Check out my tutorial on it. Basically, I remember a few years ago when I made my game Hyper Knights, I wanted that game to be playable with a gamepad. And back then, using a gamepad with the legacy input manager, that was a complete nightmare. That was horrible. So back then, I had to buy an asset in order to make it work. Whereas nowadays, using the new input system, this one is really awesome, so definitely make sure you use it. One of the main complaints about it is how it's a bit too complex, and that is true, it is quite a bit more complex, but at the same time, you can make it pretty much just as compact as the legacy input manager. All those extra capabilities also make it really awesome, like for example, adding game support is really easy, and it also includes a built-in way of doing a virtual cursor. For example, my game Thinking Gardens uses this to make the game playable with both a mouse and keyboard, as well as a gamepad. And then just one final note, which is if you're using the legacy input manager, always remember you can always refactor your code. For me personally, that is exactly how I normally do it. Any kind of project I do, in the beginning, I always use the input manager just because it is so easy. But then later on, when it's a serious project, later on I do refactor that code in order to make it use the new input system. That is exactly what I do in my own projects and exactly what I taught in my Kitchen Chaos course. Next question, and this is a really interesting one. How many classes should your game have? So should you have less than 100, at least 100, as many as needed and no more, or just one? So this sounds like a funny question, but it really is an extremely important question. And the answer should hopefully be obvious, which is as many as needed and no more. And yep, thankfully, pretty much everyone got it right. So yeah, there's really no set number of classes the game should have. There's really no number you should go for. Always keep in mind the ultimate goal, which is to keep your code clean and organized. So for example, if you have 300 classes of 20 lines each and it takes you 10 minutes to find what you need, if so, then you might have too many. Or if you have 50 classes with 1,000 lines each, you can probably break them into several smaller classes that do one thing and one thing only. Again, remember the main goal of any kind of clean code guidelines is really just managing complexity. So that is why the answer is not a fixed number, but rather as many as needed and no more. If you add more than you need, it can become messy, and if you have too little, it can also become messy. And the answer to this with regards to classes is also the same thing with regards to functions, variables, or literally anything. Pretty much all of those are all tools to be used in your toolbox in order to help you make better games faster. So the number itself doesn't really matter, use as many as you need and no more. Now, for example, in my game has around 300 classes, and some of those are really tiny, only about 20 lines long, and others are pretty massive, like the player class is about 1,000 lines long. That's definitely quite a bit on the longer side, but everything inside that class makes sense to be in that class. The more important thing is that I can find anything I want very quickly because the classes are separated in ways that make sense and have very good descriptive names. And here's a quick tip. On Visual Studio, you can use the shortcut Ctrl plus comma in order to bring up a window where you can search any class by name, any class or function or variable or anything. This is really the shortcut that I use the most in order to move my codebase from class to class. Okay, final question. What is the position of the transform after running this code? So we've got a vector3 target transform. We're putting it on 10, 0, 0. Then we're assigning the transform.position to this target position, and then we go into the target position and we modify the x to 20. So after running these 3 lines of code, where is the transform.position right now? Is it on 10, 0, 0, 20, 0, 0, or is it unknown? This is another really important thing that might trip up some beginners, so let's see how many people got this right. In my case, I already know target position, this is a vector3, which is a value type, so I already know that when assigning that to the position, it is assigning a copy, and afterwards modifying a completely separate copy does not affect it. So in my case, I do know that it is 10, 0, 0. And if that is correct, then it seems like about 30% of people did not think so. Again, this is something that can be quite confusing if you don't know about it. If you don't know about differences between value types and reference types, difference has to do with whether you are passing in something as a copy or you're passing in something as a reference. In this case, vector3 is a value type, meaning when you pass in something to the position, you are passing in a copy of the target position. And when you later modify that target position, it does not modify the copy that the transform.position holds. If you do want to modify it, then you need to set it again to another value. Like I said, this is something that is quite a bit tricky, so if you don't know differences between value and reference types, definitely go make sure you watch this video. I know myself, I had tons of problems when I was a beginner because I did not understand this reference. I would make some kind of change and then have no idea why something changed or something did not change. Alright, so those are the last 10 questions on the Question of the Day feature. Again, you can always find the latest one directly on the website. or you can go to your user page and sign up to get emails whenever a new question is posted. I hope that these questions and these detailed answers help you learn something new, so thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.